Welcome to this explainer. We usually just think of Marco Polo as a name from a history book, or maybe that game you play in the swimming pool. But 750 years ago, he was basically the medieval world's human Google Maps. Today, we're diving into his massive, epic journey. And we aren't just stopping at his famous time in China. We're going to look closely at his breathtaking and honestly often overlooked encounters in South India.
To really get a grip on what this meant, you've got to put yourself in his shoes for a second. Imagine stepping out into a completely unknown, frankly deadly world 750 years ago. No smartphones, no GPS, definitely no safe roads. You're relying entirely on sheer grit and courage to cross freezing mountain ranges and blistering deserts. That's the absolute Wild West, or rather Wild East, that Marco Polo was navigating.
Chapter 1. The Young Explorer of Venice. So let's start where it all began, 1254, in Venice. Venice wasn't just a picturesque city back then, it was an absolute powerhouse of global trade. Marco actually had a pretty lonely start to life. His mom passed away when he was young, and his dad Niccolò and uncle Maffeo were constantly off trading in Asia. But then, fast forward to 1271, and everything changes. He joins them on a massive new expedition, one that was ordered directly by the Mongol emperor himself, Kublai Khan.
And here is the kicker. 17. Marco was literally just 17 years old when he packed up and started this perilous, multi-thousand-kilometer trek into the absolute unknown. Just think about what you were doing at 17. Now compare that to sailing across the Mediterranean, hiking through the Middle East, Persia, and scaling the towering Pamir Mountains. Just incredible.
Chapter 2. Mysterious Asia and the Mongol Empire.
Now, as he ventured deeper, he had to cross the terrifying Gobi Desert, which came with this massive local superstition. Travelers genuinely believed the desert was haunted by evil spirits. They'd hear these eerie, howling voices at night that literally drove people mad. But Marco? He approached this with real logic. He figured out that these terrifying ghosts were actually just the intense, whipping sandstorms and wind echoing through the dunes.
Finally arriving in China around 1275, he was utterly floored by Kublai Khan's empire. It was so technologically advanced, it might as well have been the future. He documented things that Europeans couldn't even wrap their heads around. We're talking paper money instead of heavy metal coins. Burning black stones, which of course we know is coal. An incredibly organized postal system, giant canals, a booming silk industry, and even gunpowder. For a 13th century European, this was literally like visiting another planet. Chapter 3. Pandya Kingdom, South India's prosperity.
After spending years serving as an envoy for Kublai Khan, Marco finally headed back west via the sea route, bringing us to a really monumental part of his journey, the Pandya Kingdom, located in modern-day Tamil Nadu. He spent time documenting the Coromandel and Malabar coasts, and he was amazed by this highly organized Hindu society. He basically showed the rest of the world that medieval India was way more than just an agricultural hub. It was a massively wealthy, dominant international maritime power with an incredibly rich temple culture. He was especially captivated by their world-famous pearl industry. He paid close attention to the incredibly dangerous process the local divers used. These brave guys would plunge deep into the ocean without any modern gear, meticulously extract the oysters from the seafloor, and bring up these precious gems for global export. It was this exact industry that made the Pandya Kingdom astonishingly wealthy.
Chapter 4. A book that changed the world.
But here's a crazy twist about how we even know all of this. Marco Polo didn't actually just sit down at a comfy desk with a quill to write his memoir. Nope. In 1298, after he finally made it home, he was captured during a naval war between Venice and Genoa. So he's sitting in a prison cell, and to pass the time, he dictates his epic adventures to his cellmate, a romance writer named Rusticolo de Pisa. And together, totally by accident, they created The Travels of Marco Polo, one of the most famous books in human history.
But, and this is wild, Europeans completely rejected it at first. They actually mocked the book, calling it Il Milione, basically the million lies. Why? Because to the medieval European mind, claims of massive Asian megacities with millions of people, the unbelievable wealth of India, burning black stones for heat, and using paper instead of gold, well, it was just too far-fetched. They were 100% convinced he was making the whole thing up.
Chapter 5. Marco Polo's Immortal Legacy. Which brings us to the debates that still swirl around him today. The big one? did Marco Polo actually go to China? Yeah, some skeptics still question his entire trip. Their main piece of evidence is that his massive, highly detailed book mysteriously leaves out things like tea, chopsticks, and most suspiciously, the Great Wall of China. I mean, how do you spend years in China and miss a giant thousands of miles long wall, right?
Well, if you look at the historical context, there's a pretty solid explanation. Historians neutrally point out that back in the 13th century, under Mongol rule, the Great Wall simply wasn't the iconic, continuous stone fortress we all picture today. It was mostly just a series of ruined, disconnected earthen mounds. So it makes total sense that a traveler focused on a trade mission might just ride right past it without even thinking to write it down.
Regardless of the skeptics, his global impact is absolutely undeniable, especially in three main areas. First, global trade. By documenting places like the Pandya Kingdom, he opened the West's eyes to India's immense wealth. Second, the age of exploration. His book was a massive bestseller and directly inspired future explorers. In fact, Christopher Columbus literally carried a heavily annotated copy of Marco Polo's book with him on his voyage to the Americas. And third, literature. He brilliantly bridged the East and West, completely transforming the genre of travel writing forever.
But my absolute favorite detail of this whole story happens at the very end. On his deathbed in Venice in 1324, his friends and local priests were begging Marco to just confess. They wanted him to admit his stories were fake, tall tales, so he could die with a clear conscience. But instead of apologizing, he left us with this: "I have only told half. The real world is even more amazing." He knew that curiosity and exploration are the real forces that push human civilization forward. So, what unknown frontiers are out there right now, just waiting for someone curious enough to go out there and tell the world about them?